All right. Happy Thursday, everybody. We're almost to the weekend. Welcome back to another Thursday night review. My name is indie author Nick Belisi. And I think what we decided that we're going to do is I think I'm just going to read the book. I mean, it gives you guys like the audio version and stuff like that. And it's much easier because it'll allow you to be able to be a part of the story. You know what I mean? And then kind of give me an insight of what's going on rather than just do like a quick tidbit on the Easter eggs alone. So I think going forward, what we're going to wind up doing is that I'll read the chapter, and then after that, I'll give you the Easter eggs from the chapter. So you'll hear the thing in its entirety. Just a little special treat for you guys for sticking with me. So last week, we talked about chapter 1, and we were getting a description, basically what was going on with Gwen, why she left Reedsville, how she came to, get to the situation she's in and stuff like that. Before each one of them, I'm going to say just straight up that there is a lot of trigger warnings and stuff like that I have to deal with this book. So if you feel uncomfortable at any point in time, please feel free to jump off. We're not trying to trigger anybody or anything like that. With that being said, I'm going to get right into reading it. So there is dialogue and stuff like that, so I may stop during my reading and stuff like that to explain about what's going on, just so you can understand. It's a little harder to, read it than it is, or, talk it than it is to read it, just because of my writing style and how I have it set up. So, chapter 2 is Seductive Solitude. I hadn't thought about these memories in such a long time, and reliving them made me feel uneasy. I started to gather my things from the musty hotel room and plan my next move. I had no real place to live these days, and I would go from motel room to motel room most nights. Things have been tough the last 5 years since I left Reedsville. I had no clear plan in my head when I left. I just knew that I needed to go. In the beginning, I made some friends along the way, and even stayed in some homeless women's shelters for a while. It was there I found a way to suppress my demons. With all this pain plaguing my mind, I discovered a way to drown it all out. I began experimenting with alcohol at age 16, and it gave me serenity at first. I could escape the torment in my mind, but inevitably it became something that I relied on even to this day. It had been years since I could successfully say I was sober for more than a day or so. It's not as if I wanted to stop, but even if I tried, I knew I was relying on it. There were so many nights that the few of us from the shelter would go and snatch and run liquor stores just to feed the habit. This was my life from when I left until now. I had no real direction or any clue what was going to do with the rest of my life. I was completely broken and alone. I had no family to turn to, and the most important thing on my mind was simply living day to day. It didn't matter to me if I lived or died. All I wanted to do was find some peace for once. I knew I needed to get some food in me before I started drinking again. It always made me feel sick if I didn't eat that day. After I had gathered all of my belongings, I closed the motel door behind me. It was still early in the morning, and I was going to head over to the local deli to see a friend of mine named Ryan. Ryan worked in the deli and would always give me some food to make sure I was fed. He was a very religious man and always believed in helping others in need. The town I'd been staying in the last 2 years was called Stinson. It was roughly 3 hours outside of Reedsville. The town was much bigger than Reedsville, but it wasn't big enough to be considered a city. There were many franchise stores here, and it didn't have the homely feeling Reedsville did. There are a few local stores like the one I was heading to, but you could tell that corporate America had planted its flag here and pushed the little people out. I'm not sure why I've been residing here other than convenience, as there's nothing special about this place. The only thing I really did like is on the outskirts of town there was a small waterfalls that I would find myself using to wash my clothes or simply enjoy a beautiful sunset. There are so many times that I would stay there overnight and fall asleep to the water cascading down the falls. It was such a sweet and simple sound that allowed me to drift into the night without a care in the world. I needed to go about 4 blocks from here in order to reach the deli. I started walking with a faster pace as I wanted to get there before the big breakfast crowd came in. The biggest reason is I didn't like when people would look at me and judge me. It was obvious that I was homeless, and I didn't do much to my appearance to make everyone think otherwise. I had a small red backpack that I carried with me that held my makeup, toiletries, a few pair of clothes, and a few other personal items. I'm about 5'4" the last time I checked. My hair was bright blonde, but you couldn't tell because it was constantly dirty. My clothes had holes in them, and I tried my best to cut and crop them as they became more worn, but you could still tell I wasn't doing it for any sort of fashion statement. I would drench my clothes throughout the day with perfume. I did that to mask any smell coming from me because I wasn't always able to get to a shower every day. The thought of what I am does bother me, and I would be lying if I said it didn't. However, I just didn't have the ways everyone else did to make myself up each and every day. As I walked down the street, As I just lost my spot. I did that to. However, I didn't have any ways everyone else did to make myself up each and every day. As I walked down the street, I could see the reflection in the windows as I passed by the local businesses, and it just disgusted me. I think today would make my way to the falls and clean up a little bit. I could go down by the drop boxes where people would leave donated clothes and hopefully find some warmer outerwear as winter was approaching, and I needed to be prepared. I was lucky everyone was so close together because it made my day convenient for accomplishing tasks for my daily survival. I only had about a block left before I got to the deli, and I was making good time. I knew I was close, not because I had done this walk so many times before, but because I could smell the sweet aromas from the grill filling the air and making my stomach growl with such intensity. I hadn't eaten since lunch yesterday, so my body desperately needed food. As I came around the corner, I didn't see anyone in the parking lot, so I headed straight over. I peered into the window of the shop and adjusted myself in order to look just a little bit more presentable. Although Ryan was a very religious man, I knew he found me attractive, as I would catch him staring at me like I was food. I reached into my backpack and grabbed some makeup. As I used the window as a mirror, I applied some blush and took some hand rags and cleaned my face up. I took some perfume that I swiped from the Goodwill a few weeks ago and sprayed it all over myself. The smell of what seemed to be some sort of apple blend covered my body like a shawl, masking the odor that stained my clothes. I then adjusted my bra to make sure my breasts seemed bigger and more presentable. I wasn't what men would call busty by any means, but I had enough to catch an eye or two. Once I was satisfied with what I could do with myself in 6 a.m. outside of a store, I took a deep breath and walked inside. The bell ringing above my head as I pushed the door open signaled Ryan that someone had entered. I could hear him from the back, Ryan saying that he would be right with me. I walked up to the counter, seeing if there was anything I could shove in my back quickly, but he had nothing laying out. And after a few moments, Ryan came out and spoke. "Good morning, Gwen. How was your day yesterday?" "Good morning, Ryan. It was okay. Same as always." "I'm glad to see you're all right. Have you given any thought to coming to church with me this weekend?" "I'm still mulling it over for sure, but I promise I will come with you one day." "I'm glad, because the Lord will always welcome you with open arms. Now, what can I do for you this morning? You want your usual?" "Yes, that would be great." Leaning over the counter just slightly and folding my arms to push my breasts up, I could see Ryan's eyes traveling from my face to my chest. I had his attention now as I spoke. "I have a little problem, Ryan. My boss never paid me this week, so I'm a little short on cash. Is there any way we could work something out where I could pay you in a few days?" "Sure, not a problem at all. I'll get right on making you that sandwich." Ryan walked into the back of the deli, and I started to pan the room for things to steal. It seemed like he was the only one working now, so this would be my opportunity to gather some supplies. I didn't feel good about doing things like this, but I became numb to the moral dilemma of it all. This was survival, and I had to do whatever it took to keep me going. I walked over to the soda cooler and slowly pulled the door open. I grabbed 3 drinks and shoved them in my backpack. I then slowly closed the door not to make a sound and walked over to the table where he would keep condiments. I started stuffing my bag with napkins, condiments, and those little half-and-half containers. I kept my eyes focused on the counter to keep a lookout because I'm certain he wouldn't be too happy if he caught me. After I got enough things, I walked back over the counter and placed my bag on the floor. I could hear the meat sizzling on the grill and Ryan humming a song while cooking it. The smell of the bacon and eggs made my knees weaker than any orgasm I'd ever experienced. My mouth began watering from my imagination on how good this was going to taste. I reached down into the front part of my backpack where I kept a few travel-sized bottles of vodka, and I grabbed one out. I unscrewed the cap and took a long gulp from it. I then noticed, while holding the vodka in my mouth, that I had left behind my chaser in the hotel room. I headed back to the cooler and opened it up to grab an energy drink, and as I grabbed the drink from the cooler, Ryan said, "Food's all done, Miss Gwen." I quickly opened the can, chased the vodka down, shutting the cooler door behind me and swallowing it hard. I replied, "Thanks, Ryan. You're the best. Would you mind if I took this energy drink as well? My throat's killing me." Ryan nodded to me that I was fine. I walked up to the counter and grabbed my food. I picked the hot sandwich wrapper wrapped in foil and walked over to the counter again. I couldn't have my sandwich without drenching it in ketchup. It was something I had always done since I was a little girl. I began to think about how my mom used to cook me this and would slather ketchup all over the inside of my sandwich. My mom used to purposely leave the bottle of ketchup on the table for me because she knew that no matter how much she put on it, I would always want more. The thought of it cracked a little smile on my face as Ryan said, "You have such a beautiful smile. You should really do it more often." I was just in my head as usual. Thanks again for the sandwich, though. I wrapped my sandwich back up and started for the door. "Hey, hang on a second, Gwen. I have something for you. I know it's not much, but I want you to have it." "What is it?" "It's a $50 bill. Just hang on to it." I really appreciate it, Ryan, but I don't want your charity. I told you, I'm going to be getting paid soon, and then I'll have plenty of money. Nah, that's okay, but in the meantime, take this. You can pay me back whenever if you want. I casually walked over to Ryan and took the money from his hand. Although I played the part of not needing it, he just answered the question on how I was going to get drunk today. And I wasn't going to pass that money up. I looked him in the eyes and gave him a smile and spoke, "Thank you, Ryan. This is very nice of you." "It's not a problem at all. If you ever need anything, please come see me. God bless you, Gwen, and I hope to see you soon." I waved goodbye to him as I pulled open the door. I started walking with the sandwich in one hand and the drink in the other over to the little strip mall across from the deli. There were a bunch of benches outside of some of the stores, and since it was so early, I knew no one would be around to bother me. When I approached the bench, I rolled the backpack off my shoulders and let it fall into the seat. I sat down next to it and unfolded my hot sandwich between my legs. There was no way I was waiting to eat this, and my body couldn't resist the teasing any longer. I lifted the sandwich and took a massive bite out of it. The taste of all the deliciousness grinding up between my teeth and resting on my tongue made my eyes roll and my toes curl. This was just what I needed right now. While I sat there eating away, I started to devise a plan in my head on how I would get things done today. I knew I needed to score some warmer clothes, get a bath, and I had a few hours before the liquor store would open, so I can get those done first. Since it was early in the morning, no one would be out at the falls, so I could bathe in peace. The clothing drop box was on the way, so I could stop there, and it would give me a chance to wash the clothes at the falls should I need to. Then by the time I finished here, the liquor store would be opening, and I could get my daily libations. I peeked into the front of my backpack and saw I had 3 one-shooter bottles of vodka and a small flask-sized bottle of whiskey that was gifted to me by another person I met a few days ago. I wasn't big into whiskey, but it would help if the symptoms of withdrawal came on before the liquor store opened. Seeing I was okay with my supply gave me such a massive sigh of relief. There was nothing worse in the world than having a drink when the overwhelming panic and shake set in. I had experienced that feeling just one too many times in my life, and I used to take anxiety medication to suppress it, but that would require money, which I don't come across much. It was simply easier to steal alcohol and just keep feeding the dragon roaring inside me. The alcohol also helped me cope with the demons I carried forged into my soul. When I was drunk, I would shed that burden and not have a care in the world. That's not to say that drinking solved everything, as I countlessly found myself blacking out and winding up in places I had no recollection of going to. Weighing the ups and downs in my head constantly and trying to tell myself to clean just simply never came to fruition. I had always been a creature of habit, and this was just part of my life. As I finished my sandwich, I threw the wrapper in the garbage, gathered my things, and headed towards the closed drop-off bins. The bins were located about a half a mile down the road, and it wouldn't take me very long to get there. As I walked past the stores on the main drag, I began to envision a life far different than my own. I thought about being a responsible woman with a purpose and a home to go home to. It was always a dream of mine to have a family and raise some children. The constant distrust of men in my life proved to me that simply just was not possible. Over the years since George, men would use me and abuse me. One of the men I was with was when I was age 17, seemed like he was going to be the one. Being so young and naive, I thought that he would be the answer to all of my problems in life. His name was Victor, but everyone called him Spike. He was 10 years older than me, but age didn't seem to matter to him. He had his own home in Hamburg, New York, which wasn't far from today. It was a nice small town, and I enjoyed being there. It was a place I stumbled upon in my travels going town to town. It was in this town I met Victor while I was begging for money outside the liquor store. He came out of the store after buying cigarettes and offered me one. I could tell he was instantly into me, and he could not take his eyes off me. He offered to take me out and get me some food. Being this was the first real person that was nice to me since I had left Reedsville, I tagged along. He was an absolute gentleman in the beginning, taking me to places and letting me stay at his house. He had a roommate living with him, but we all got along like one big happy family. I never thought to ask Victor what he did for work, but he would be gone most of the day. He simply told me he was in sales, and I just assumed he was like a car dealer or something. While Victor was at work, I would spend my time keeping up with the house and hanging out with his roommate Joe. We would play video games together, and I was just happy in life. About 6 months into the relationship with Victor, I found out just exactly what he did for work. I went to go pick up some of his dirty clothes off the floors when I noticed wads of money tucked in his pants pockets. Upon further inspection, I noticed he was also carrying drugs, and a little bounded book with the list of names of what seemed to be people he was dealing to. I was skimming through the book when Victor came into the room and caught me. He explained to me that he sold drugs as a side hustle and it was nothing for me to worry about. I didn't really care how he made a living. I was just in love and finally happy. Then Victor asked me if I wanted to try some of his product. Before this day, the most I had ever done was drink and occasionally smoke pot with Joe, but I was curious. Victor told me it was nothing to worry about and I would have fun. I trusted him more than anyone in my life, and I felt he would never do anything to harm me. We walked into the bathroom of the house, and he pulled out a little black zipper bag and placed it on the counter. We both sat down, and when he unzipped the bag, it contained a burned spoon, needle, lighter, and a powdery substance. He explained to me just to relax as he took off his belt and tied it around my left arm. I was so nervous, but he kept assuring me everything would be fine. He placed something into the spoon with some fluid and then lit a lighter below it. After about a minute of wavering the lighter below the spoon, he used a syringe to suck up the fluid. Victor leaned over to me, telling me to pull the belt tight with my teeth because it was time to go for a ride. Pulling the belt as tight as I could, I began to shake a little from being so nervous. Victor placed his hand on mine, told me he loved me, and that I shouldn't worry. This was the first time that he had ever told me that, and I felt complete. I could feel the tears in my eyes swelling from pure happiness. It was everything I wanted in life. I mumbled out I loved him too, and I was ready for the gift he was about to give me. The slight pinch of the needle reminded me of a bee sting that I had gotten as a kid, but before I could fully relive that memory, I was in heaven. The drug coursing through my veins took a matter of seconds before I was completely lifted. I felt like I was hovering above my body with nothing but a tingling sensation covering me. The feeling was like having an orgasm repeatedly for hours. It was my very first dance with heroin, but it wouldn't be my last. From that day on, we would shoot up together regularly multiple times a day. Once we got high, we would hold each other in our embrace of love. All the missing pieces in my broken life had been mended, and I was exactly where I wanted to be. The heroin would enter my body and fill every crack from my broken past and make me feel as if I was whole again. We used this as our bonding moment each day, but I should have known that happiness wouldn't last forever. It was about 3 months later since my first time that I was a full-blown junkie. Not only did Victor lie about his work, but I really didn't know who he was. He was a massive dealer in the area, and he worked for an even bigger dealer by the name of Trigger. I didn't know the real guy's name, but I heard Victor talk about how he was a ruthless guy and he couldn't be trusted. One day, while I was riding around with Victor in his car making pickups, we got held up at gunpoint by this guy in a ski mask. He had stolen all the drugs and money from us and took our car. I was so high on heroin I didn't even realize what was happening. One minute I am sitting in Victor's car listening to music, and the next I'm lying on the side of the road while Victor frantically screamed at the sky. He told me that he was going to be in a lot of trouble with his dealer and that we needed to leave town. He helped me off the ground and we walked 3 miles back to his house. I was in and out of consciousness, so I don't remember a whole lot of that walk. I noticed we were home because I felt the warm air in the house and a lit fireplace on my skin, and it felt so relaxing. Victor laid me on the couch as he was gathering a bag together. I heard him arguing with Joe in the next room about how he was in trouble and needed to leave. Time for me was moving at an unusual rate, jumping from moment to moment. I do remember that he came up to me and told me that we needed to go. I tried my best to function, but I was on a half a bun of heroin a day at this point, and I was completely controlled by the chug. I pleaded with Victor just to shoot up one more time before we left, and he said that we had to make it quick. As he shot more heroin into my arm, I was out. I couldn't tell you how long I was out, but when I woke up, I was completely disoriented. The house was completely trashed, and things were thrown all over the place. I didn't see Victor or Joe anywhere. I went stumbling around the house looking for him, and I couldn't find either of them. I started to feel sick, so I walked out the back door and threw up outside over the deck railing. As I lifted my head up from puking, I noticed Victor laying on the ground beside Joe. They were face down, and I staggered over to them, and I noticed there was blood everywhere. I rolled Victor's body over and realized he'd been shot in the face. There wasn't much left of his face, but you could tell it was from a gun. I screamed in complete panic that the love of my life had been taken from me. I didn't know what to do because if I called the cops, they would surely arrest me for not only the heroin, but possibly murder too. I stayed some time holding his lifeless body in my lap while I was begging him to come back. Then the itch to fix started to settle in, and I needed to get out of here. I grabbed Victor's hand and kissed it one last time and headed inside. I grabbed my bag as fast as I could with a few things, making sure that I definitely had my fix kit and any remaining baggies from the brick I had left. I took one last look at the house and headed out into the night. I had nowhere to go, and I was back to where I started, completely scared and alone. I found my way to the back of an alley behind a fast food restaurant, and I tried to figure out what I should do next. No matter what I tried to come up with, the thought of just getting high outweighed everything. I had to fix, and I reached into my bag and shot myself up. It didn't take long for the drugs to knock me out again. When I woke up, I found a woman pushing me down the street in a shopping cart. I couldn't tell if any of this was real, and I was going in and out again. When I finally woke up, I was in what looked like a big gymnasium. There were many beds set up all around me, and women who was pushing me was wiping my head down with a wet rag. Confused more than ever on who she was or where we were, I began to panic. The woman told me to relax and that I was in a safe place. She informed me that she took me to the shelter so I wouldn't be found by the cops. She had me take this drink from a flask she had, and I almost vomited it out right when I drank it. She told me it was vodka and I needed to drink it in order to help ease the withdrawal symptoms. I took her advice and drank it down as fast as I could in order not to taste it. She handed me a soda to wash the taste away, and I drank that down as well. She explained to me how she found me convulsing in the back alley with a few strangers sifting through my things. She had managed to scare them off and placed me into her cart that brought me here. She then told me that this was a safe haven from the outside world and I could stay here to get better. The next several days were a blur and I felt sicker than ever in my entire life. I would go from shaking from the cold to being completely burning up like my bones were on fire. Time still escaping me and not knowing whether or not I was going to live or die made me feel weightless. I thought this was how I was going to go, but I managed to pull out of it. It took a long time of living in the shelter and surviving for me to come back from all of it, but I did it. I just changed one drug for another as she told me I couldn't afford medical care and that drinking would help control the urges. Since that day, I continued using alcohol to solve all my problems. These were my demons I carried around with me, like ghosts in a graveyard hovering over the vessels they once inhabited. I couldn't ponder too long on these demons or I would fall victim to them again, so I pressed on and tried to focus on the task at hand. I had finally arrived at the used clothes drop-off bins to begin to sift through the garbage, hoping to score some decent clothes. As I sifted through the bags, I happened to come across a fluffy but terribly stained coat that I thought would be perfect for me. I tried it on and it had a few holes and stains on it, but it fit like a glove. This would be the perfect for me for the winter time. I could wear it around during the day and use it for a blanket if I found myself without a spot to crash for the night. Continuing to wrestle around things in the bag, I came across something that shook me right to my core. I found a couple of dime bags thrown in there with the clothes with a powdery residue in them. My anxiety began to overcome me, making me feel completely disoriented. My mind was telling me to stick the bags in my mouth and see what it was, but I was not going to put myself through that hell again. I had managed to dance with the devil once in my life and walk away, and there was no way I was going to roll the dice again. I dropped everything and started heading to the falls. I ran as fast as I could, trying to outrun the chains of hell pulling me back to those bags. With each step slamming harder and harder into the pavement below me, I came to the entrance of the falls. Luckily for me, the weather outside was about 75 degrees, so it wasn't too bad to bathe in. As I came to the opening to the first set of falls, all my worries seemed to wash away with the calming nature of the water crashing down in front of me. There was something so soothing and simple about being here. I had always fascinated with the way certain sounds could bring such a calming nature. When I was a child, I would lay close to the window on a rainy night and listen to the sounds of the raindrops on my windowsill. It was a sweet and sincere lullaby that would carry me off into my dreams every time I had heard it. I looked around to make sure I was completely alone, and once I felt like I was, I began to undress. Completely naked now, I slowly walked up to the water and dipped my toe in to make sure it wasn't too cold. The water wasn't the warmest, but I would be able to manage a quick bath before it got too bad. I descended into the water, and it was as high as my shoulders. I swam over to the falls and began soaking myself under the cascading water. I could have easily prevented this and showered in the motel room last night, but I got too drunk and forgot. I could feel all the dirt and grime sliding down my hair as I took handfuls of it and rinsed it out. There was such an overwhelming feeling of being clean that only someone who lived in constant filth could describe. All the shame and disgust washing off from me and dispersing into the water around me. I cleaned myself off the best I could using some soap I stole from the motel the night before. It wasn't the greatest stuff, but it would certainly do the job. As I washed my body with the bar of soap, I examined myself with each part that the soap covered on me. The overwhelming amounts of scars and bruises covering my body from years on the road made me feel as if I was ugly. My body had hair on it from not being groomed consistently, and I just felt an abundance of self-consciousness every time I saw myself naked. My arms had scars from track marks, and I was so skinny you could see my ribs attempting to burst from under my skin. Reminding myself of all this conjured great sadness within me and made me just want to scream out. I submerged my head completely underwater and began screaming as loud as I possibly could. Air bubbles pouring from my mouth and floating away to the surface, carrying hidden windows of pain, ferociously bellowing out of me and disseminating into the world above. When I had let out so much pain as I possibly could, I began to rise like a phoenix from the ashes. As I came up from the water, I happened to catch a glimpse in something in the distance. It looked like a person across the water waving to me. I quickly kept my body under the waterline so not to expose myself and squinted to see who it was. The I couldn't make out completely who it was since it was so far away, and it was still early in the morning. They seemed to be signaling for me to come towards them, but I was naked, and there was no way I was going over there. I started to slowly move back towards my belongings when the figure let out a massive scream. Hearing this completely caught my attention. I was solely focused on it now. The figure placed its arms outward from its body and became engulfed in flames. I couldn't believe what was happening. I had to wipe my eyes to make sure what I was seeing was real. Before I could open my eyes, it was gone. It instantly reminded me of that dream I had last night. But how could that be possible? I looked down at my body to see if the marks were still there, and they were gone. The burn on my hand and the bruises on my arms were suddenly no longer there. Did I imagine all this? Completely dumbfounded on how this was possible, I began to swim faster towards the shore. I quickly got out and began dressing myself with some clothes that I had in my backpack. I know I needed to wash some clothes, but I had a bad feeling come over me about being here for the first time ever. As I shoved my old clothes in my backpack, I noticed a crumpled up photo I had sitting in there. It was a photo of me and my parents from when I was little that I had taken when I left Reidsville. It was discovered among the wreckage and gift to Stacy's family from the fire department along with a few other things. It was one of the last memories I had of them. I used to stare at it all the time and talk to them, hoping that my parents could hear me wherever they were. After all the years on the road, its condition got worse and worse. I reached in and pulled it out and began to pan over it. Something inside me was pulling me towards this photo for some reason, but there was nothing different about it. I kept looking at it like it was some sort of sign when I heard something move in the water in front of me. I sat there staring at the water, but I thought to myself, it must have been a fish or something. As I started to stand up and grab my backpack, that burned figure was right in front of me again. The figure grabbed my arms, again paralyzing them, and screamed, "Look what you've done, you whore!" I started screaming, but the figure just laughed at me in such a heinous way. I kept trying to break free from its hold, but it wouldn't budge at all. The completely charred figure, hysterically laughing at me, screamed, "Time to come home now, little girl." I closed my eyes and screamed, but then it disappeared. I fell to the ground in a panic, grabbed my things, and began running towards town. Fumbling all my belongings within my arms, I did my best to get out of there as quickly as possible. What the hell is going on with me? Why am I seeing all these things? How the hell is any of this possible? I had so many questions flooding my mind, but all I knew is I needed to get out of here. Once I came back to the opening of the path leading in, I stopped and caught my breath. Panting like a thirsty dog on a hot day, I reached into my bag and grabbed one of my sodas I had stolen earlier. Unscrewing the cap and dropping it to the ground, I began to chug the bottle down and basically the halfway mark. Desperately trying to calm down and justify what just happened in my mind, it began swimming circles. The only thing that kept plaguing my mind was what it said. When it told me it was time to go home. I didn't have a home anymore. Could it have been talking about Reidsville? Why would I possibly ever go back there for? This wasn't the first time I had hallucinated something in my life, but it was never this vivid before. The feelings of withdrawal were sneaking up on me, and I needed to rectify that situation. I began to gather myself and started walking back to town to wait for the liquor store to open. The never-ending cycle of overanalyzing things started up in my mind with each step I took. At about 5 minutes of walking, I was in sight of Smokey's, which was the liquor store I most frequented. I would normally go to Stack's, but it was on the other side of town, and I only went there when I was trying to steal booze. It was easy to steal there because the clerk was always at the counter and on her phone and never paying attention. Smokey's opened the earliest anyway, so it just made sense. Since I had the money from Ryan earlier, I didn't need to steal today. I approached the shop and sat down beside an old payphone that seemed out of commission. There were a few other people waiting just like I was, so I didn't feel like a complete addict. The store would be opening in about 20 minutes, so I reached down into the bag and finished off the rest of one of the shooters I had, using my soda to chase it down. Vodka really has an unpleasant taste, but the chaser helped a lot. I leaned my head back against the base of the payphone when no sooner did it begin to ring. The loud ringing startled me and took me by complete surprise. I always thought this thing was broken, as it always looked completely unkempt. I stood up from my spot, and the phone just kept on ringing. Curiosity got the best of me as I slowly answered the phone. I waited a few moments just listening when a male voice whispered out to me, "Come home, Gwenny." I heard the phone disconnect, and immediately after he said that, it literally scared the shit out of me. The only person in my entire life to call me that was my mother. My mother had been dead for 7 years now, and it wasn't even her voice. I dropped the phone out of my hand and let it fall, swinging back and forth from the booth. I heard a vehicle pulling up across the street at the bus stop, and as I turned around, I noticed it was a transit bus that read Reedsville above the driver's side. What are the chances that this all happened? This had to be a sign of some sort. So I grabbed my bag and quickly ran across the street. As I approached the bus, I reached into my bag and grabbed the money Ryan gave me earlier. I handed it to the driver and paid for my ticket. Once I received my ticket and change, I found a seat on the back of the bus and made myself comfy. This was going to be a 3-hour ride, and I grabbed my just-in-case emergency bottle of whiskey and started to sip it. After 5 long years, I was heading home in search of answers. And that right there is chapter 2. So, to dive into it a little bit. So the name, and give some Easter eggs. The name of the chapter is Seductive Solitude. And the reason why I went with that name, it's actually going to be the name of my next book after I finish the Paradise series. So I was kind of just preemptively putting them in there as like a little, remembrance type deal. So that is why I did that. Now, on page 25... where she's talking about, she said, I had no real direction or any clue of what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was completely broken and alone. I had no family to turn to, and the most important thing on my mind was living day to day. It didn't matter to me if I lived or died, and all I wanted to do was find some peace for once in my life. So the reason why I put that in there, that's exactly how I felt. Now, like I said in my last video and stuff like that, a lot of the things that Gwen's feeling and stuff like that was how I was feeling when I was going through the Navy and I was getting out of that. So... when she's talking about like how she felt dead and she had nobody to turn to and stuff like that, I was in California, very far away from home in New Jersey, and I didn't really have anybody out there to support me or anything like that. So I felt the exact same way. And then all of that is transitioned into this book. And, that's why I put that in there, because if you were to go through my old journals and stuff like that I kept around that time, you would see that that's exactly how I was feeling. That's exactly how, all the pain and stuff that I was going through. So we are introduced to not a main character or anything like that, but a pretty, and I guess, decent character for that point in time, Ryan Chambers. Now, you're going to see a lot in this book. A lot of people in this book are named after, like, I guess, a nod to people I know in reality. So Ryan Chambers is actually, Ryan was taken from the name of one of my coworkers. And Chambers, actually, I was going through training down in District for the post office at that time, and the guy who was giving the training, his last name was Chambers. So I just took the two of them and combined them. Now, I modeled Ryan after the actual person that I know in real life. Very religious guy, but he also has like a wandering eye and stuff like that. He's big in like making it known when he's like checking out women and stuff like that. So I made the character just like him, and I made him work at a deli because that's where we usually go in the morning. We would go to the deli next door to the post office and stuff like that, and we'd all have breakfast. So it just made sense to make him that. Now, one of the parts that people have told me they like a lot, I know Stormy could attest to this too, is when Gwen goes to the falls, when she's describing, the peace and serenity it brings to her and stuff like that. So the idea of the falls came to me because when I was a kid and I was growing up in Hampton, what we used to do is me and my friends, we would ride our bikes down to the Swartzwood Deli. And, it was a couple miles. It wasn't like it was like a simple ride. But in order to go through there, you had to go down from the road we lived on, Passagi, onto Old Tannery. And when you were getting on Old Tannery, there's a bridge down there. And if you follow that bridge just a little bit down, you'll come to these beautiful falls. And me and my friends and stuff like that, we would hang out under the bridge or by the falls and stuff like that. We would smoke and, just hang out. And, it was one of those things that we did, so that's how I paid homage to that, because I thought it was just so beautiful to sit there on the rocks and stuff like that and then watch the waterfalls and stuff and just be so at ease. So that's where that came from. Now, like I said, with Gwen being homeless and stuff like that, when she's in his deli and she's stealing like the condiments and all that stuff just to survive, when I was waiting to get out of the Navy, they told me that I was going to be out in 2 weeks, but then I had to go through all this like medical stuff, and that's when I was diagnosed with borderline. But with that being said, when they were trying to figure out what I guess my mental illness was at the time, they were sitting there and they kept postponing me leaving. So that 2 weeks I was supposed to be waiting actually turned into 2 months. Now, because of that, I gave up my apartment and I had my car shipped back home to New Jersey because I thought it was only going to be the 2 weeks, and it wound up being 2 months. So I was essentially homeless at that point. And I was staying in hotels when I could. There was a couple times that I had stayed in a park and stuff like that. I was just trying to figure it out. And, whether money was the option, like one way or another, I just did it. If I had to sleep outside, I would just grab a bottle of Captain Morgan, and that would help ease that moment. So that's where Gwen going through that stuff, that's where that actually came from. It wasn't one of my proudest moments in life, but, I found over the years to get those things out and stuff like that, it was better to, write about them, and then you're kind of just like pushing it off like that's a thing of the past. So Ryan's Deli is actually modeled after my favorite deli around here called GNS. And I always went there as a kid. I still go there as an adult to this day. I take my kid with me all the time there. It's just a tremendous deli, and they make the best food. So I modeled the look and feel of it after that. Now, you see Gwen sitting there, and she's drinking vodka and, soda, or she'll use energy drinks and stuff like that. That is exactly what I was drinking in my time in the Navy when I was waiting to get out. And then, obviously, after when I did get out, my favorite thing was Stoli and Green Monster. And then eventually it started giving me like really bad heart palpitations, as, any common sense would say it would. So I stopped doing that. Now, on page 31, Gwen's talking about how when she gets the sandwich from Ryan, she takes it over to the condiment counter, and that no matter, even though she usually gets ketchup on her thing, it was never going to be enough. So she puts the sandwich down, opens it up, and just blasts it with ketchup. That was actually a tribute to my daughter, which there's a lot of tributes to her in this book. She's the cover of the soft cover book, if you guys haven't seen it. So this book, in a lot of ways, is also dedicated to her and Stormy. So, I made that nod to her because when I go to feed her and stuff like that, I could put like a mound of ketchup on her plate, and somehow or another, this kid will take whatever she's eating and in 3 scoops, like take that whole mound out, and it's just like not enough for her. So I made that little like joke right there for her. On page 34, when Gwen's sitting there and she's talking about how, I'll just read it to you. She experienced a feeling one too many times in her life and used to take anxiety medication and suppress it, but that would require money, which she didn't come across much. It was simply easier to steal alcohol and keep feeding the dragon roaring inside me. The alcohol also helped me cope with my demons that I carried forged in my soul. When I was drunk, I would shed that burden and not have a care in the world. It's not saying that drinking solved everything, as I countlessly found myself blacking out and winding up in places I had no recollection. That right there was exactly how I felt about me when I was doing it. That's exactly when I was drinking, all that vodka and stuff like that back then. That's exactly what would happen. I'd constantly wake up in places I didn't remember getting to. I mean, there was even one time when I was in San Diego that I woke up on like the side of the road, and I actually had someone else, another person in the Navy, like pick me up and take me back to my apartment. It was just wild times. Like I was so depressed out there going through a divorce and then being away from everything I'd ever known, hating the military lifestyle, and then, having nothing or no one. So I used alcohol to cope with that. Not the best idea. I definitely wouldn't recommend it, but it is. So she talks about meeting Victor. Now, Victor actually wasn't modeled after anybody in particular. That was just something that I came up with. Even the story about Gwen getting into the heroin and stuff like that, I personally never did that. So I'm just going off of what I've seen people in my circle and stuff like that who went through it go and say about it. Because I knew a handful of people that did it, but never myself. So she meets Victor in Hamburg, New York. And when she meets him in Hamburg, New York, that right there, Hamburg, is actually a nod to where I work in New Jersey. That's where I got the name to name it that. Now, on page 42, Gwen, when she gets to the falls, she's talking about how like certain sounds and stuff like that. She finds it interesting how sounds can bring you to such a special place and all that. And one of the things she mentions is how she likes listening to the rain outside of her window, on her windowsill. Now, that's actually from my own life. I hated going to my mother's house. And when I did go there and stuff like that, I didn't feel comfortable, and it used to take me a long time to fall asleep. I would usually find myself listening to my Walkman, listening to the Bloodhound Gang or Blink 182, and just drift off and asleep that way. If that wasn't working, or if I did happen to catch a night where it was raining, I would listen to the rain outside the window, and there's just something so soothing about it that even I found as an adult and stuff like that, when I couldn't fall asleep, to play that noise with like a little thunder or something in the background usually helped me drift off to sleep. So it was just something from my own. And on page 43, Gwen's talking about her scars and stuff like that, and how when she looks at her body, she's worried about how, you know, people are going to judge her, and she's ashamed of her scars, and how like her body's seen so much like torment over the ways and stuff like that. And that's how I've always felt about my own body, not only my own personal scars physically, but internally as well. And I just paid tribute to that to put it out there and say that, you know, it's the way I carried myself. You know, who was ever going to love me when they saw like the damage that I had done? And then the last thing was on page 46, the liquor store that Gwen is going to, Smokies. That's actually the nickname I have for my daughter. It's like an inside joke between me and her. But, you know, that's what I always called her. So I paid tribute to her again in that way by naming the bar or the liquor store after her. Now, like I said, each week I think that's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to stick to just reading a chapter per week. So that way if you guys want to get the book or anything like that, you can certainly read along with me. Or, you know, you could just hear about the book just from listening to me. I can't promise, you know what I mean? I do my best as far as reading goes and stuff like that. I try to make it as entertaining as possible and try to captivate you with the story, but I'm no pro whatsoever. But when we get to chapter 3 next Thursday, that chapter is called Home is Where the Heart Is. That's when we're really going to start digging into where we are. Because if you read the first book, this story takes place 2 years after the conclusion of the first book. And Gwen hasn't been there in many years. So when she does finally go back there, we're going to get a glimpse of how Reidsville has changed from the last book, but then also in her eyes from not seeing it for about 6 or 7 years. So that's something exciting that we're going to do. Now, the next time that we're going to meet is next Tuesday. And a couple things about that. One, we're doing child custody. And we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts, how to prep yourself for it, you know, what they're looking for, different things you can do to help your case and all that stuff. We're really going to dive into it. And it may take more than one session. I don't know. We're going to find out as we go through it. If it starts getting really, really long, I may split it into 2. But if I don't have to split it in 2, because I am going to try to do it in 1, then we'll just power through it and we'll do that. And, you know, I'm always open to answer any questions about that. I went through it for 4 years, and it was an absolute nightmare. And I'm sure it's not over. I'm sure at some point in the future I'll have to go through it again. But we're going to do that. Next Wednesday, I did say that we were going to add another day on. So next Wednesday, we're going to start doing DBT. I gotten a lot of people talking about, and I've seen on a lot of the Facebook groups and stuff that I follow, where people can't afford DBT, or they don't know about DBT, or they're ashamed to go and talk to a counselor about getting into DBT program. I know personally, when you try to get into it around here, it's like pulling teeth because they only offer it like twice a year, and if you miss like that week to sign up, you got to wait the 12 to 14 weeks or whatever it is to be able to have a shot at it again. And it takes like months to get into it. So the availability is not always there. But as a way to help people out and stuff like that who can't exactly get into it in the moment, we can go through the DBT workbook. You know, we'll go through like a handful of pages each Wednesday and stuff like that to kind of help everybody out that's struggling and stuff, and, you know, give back to you guys that way. You know, help me help you. So that's what we're going to do with there. And then, obviously, Thursday, we'll just continue on reading the book. I have managed to, since our last talk about the third book, I've managed to get about 7 or 8 pages done now. It's going. I'm about halfway through chapter 5. I'm still coming up with a title. I got a couple that I'm working with, but I'm not sure what I'm going to go with yet. But it is coming along. And soon we are going to be doing a teaser. I promise you guys, before Thanksgiving, I will get something out there, and we will get that checked out. So, with that being said, that's all I have for tonight. Thank you guys so much for sticking in and stuff like that, and listening to me rant about the book. And like I said, if you're interested in the book and I'm catching your attention and you like it, you could certainly go on Amazon. And when you're on Amazon, you could buy the book for 99 cents, the Kindle version. Obviously, the hardcover book and stuff like that is a little more expensive just because of printing costs and what Amazon charges, but both books are on there. You can get both of them, and then eventually, by spring of next year, you'll be able to get the third one. So,